Welcome for another great episode of Talk to Tatiana. And today I have Trivelle with me. Trivelle, welcome to the show.
Thank you so much for having me, Tatiana. How you doing?
I'm doing great. Trivelle, why don't you share with us who you are, what you do, and where you are in the world?
Yeah, of course. My name is Trivelle Simpson. I'm based out of Toronto, Canada, for those who are foreigners. And then for those who really know the city, I actually live out of a small town called Mississauga, or not small, but just outside of the GTA. I'm the president and founder of the Drive Group. We started out as a trading think tank, studying market moves and derivatives trading back in 2016. We've since evolved to sort of professional consulting, venture capital investment, as well as real estate development investment. And always trying to scale forward. But we're very happy growing a small team, love working with businesses, and scalability models would be our biggest focus.
Awesome. And how did you get to do that?
It's very interesting. I love telling this story because it is a young man's story. First, I went to York.
All right. We just had a little bit of a sound issue, so we're back. Sorry about that. Trivelle, would you please say it over?
Yeah, of course. Yeah, how did I get here? Young man's story at a New Year's Eve party. Saw a guy that I knew from church buying copious bottles of champagne. Uh, Beautiful women. The classic story. The women wanted to be with him. The men wanted to be his friend. I asked him what he did. He said he managed money in the markets. I took his card, made a call to him that week. He talked to me about derivatives trading. Wanted me to join his team. I ended up realizing his team perhaps wasn't for me, but was addicted to the industry and started that journey in 2014 with my tax return. So I was about 23 at the time. And fortunately, by the time I was 25, I was able to register the Drive Group. And by the time we were 27, or by the time it was 2017, so it's 26, we had really been scaling it forward. So now we sit here, 2023, and just the result of a lot of years of good hard work and a good team.
Awesome. Terrific. And so what type of businesses or people businesses, or actually both, do you work
Yeah.
with primarily?
So my thing in 2017, I also took on the challenge of being the head of operations for a tech company. They were developing an app that worked in both the real estate and crypto spaces. So I love technology. I love scalable industries. I like the concept of a new emerging industry where we can get sort of a footprint, or if you're a business that's in an established industry but are ready to scale. Those would be places that I love. So not always service industries, but definitely tech that have high verticals or disruptive sort of tools in existing industries. Those would be our expertise. But yeah, if you're in IT, if you're a startup and you have an app of any kind, you have a augmented service of any kind, chances are you're right up our wheelhouse.
Awesome. And what do we've talked just before we started recording, we talked about kind of what, how to piss off an accountant and why it's important, right? Why it's
Yeah.
important not to, and how an accountant is really the centerpiece of a business.
Yep.
From an investor perspective, from an investor, private equity perspective, what do you think about that, and what do you look for in a business? And elaborate on that, please.
For me, or I think for the team, a philosophy that we like is a strong balance sheet. I used to work in logistics. And if you know anything about logistics, they have high expenses. They run ridiculously high expenses. Their insurance costs, driver costs, maintenance costs. But those businesses run because of the accountants, because there's a clear, clean understanding that, yeah, we're going to burn high, but we're going to run high. And that difference is where we're going to exist as a business. And it's all about knowing customers you can get. So perfect example, I'm not giving away any trade secrets. Day and Ross, huge logistics company here in Canada. uh, they not I don't want to say gave up, but they licensed out their intra US market because they realized they didn't want to pay a lot of those borders. So if you get something coming from the States to Canada, Day and Ross will do a handoff, but they're not going across the border. Same thing going the other way. They'll do a handoff to an American freight company. That's just where they want to mitigate cost. To offset what they consider might be lost business, they're the dedicated freight provider for McCain's, who delivers fries all across the country. So when I looked at it from that perspective, what I appreciated was a business that wanted to be a master of one thing and then only good at other things. They knew how to pick their spots. What I see a lot of times with companies, perhaps that have poor balance sheets or are not right to be accelerated, their focus is too wide. So, me as an investor, I don't know what to double down on. I don't know what we're speeding up here. I could appreciate what businesses need to do to survive, but that is sometimes not what businesses need to do to get acquired. Many times, when an investor is coming into a company, they're saying, hey, look, we're going to invest, but we're doubling down on product number one. We're going to discontinue products number two, three, and four. And your balance sheet has to reflect that you as a founder or you as an owner at least has a sensitivity to understanding that sometimes what you do to generate cash flow is not the future long-term identity of your business.
Yeah, and I like that. Absolutely agree with it too. Oftentimes businesses, and this is true for accounting firms as well,
Yeah.
where accounting firms want to do be the jack of all trades
Yeah.
and serve the whatever business comes through the door. But the problem is that then you're a master of none. So I
Yep.
absolutely agree with that. And I'm not talking about necessarily niching down in a particular industry, which in my opinion is not a great way to do things, because I worked at a door company where newbies did not cut their fingers off, but on the machine, like a milling machine.
Yep. Yep.
But the pros did, and so that's why I'm not a big fan of niching down, but I am a big fan of offering a limited number of products that you're really good at and being
Yeah.
the best at those products.
I mean, let me
So I
ask you this
absolutely agree
question
with
as
it.
as an accountant who's looking at it on the front end. First thing you look at for to be healthy in a company that you're going to work with, what is to you the first sign of health?
Retained earnings.
Retained earnings. Okay. So sort of growth year over year. And do you look for that to have a percentage rate of growth, or is it sort of industry specific?
Well, for me, I look at the overall. Well, first I look at the books. I see, I look to see how the balance sheet is leveraged, how much of it is leveraged. I've once done a due diligence on an acquisition um, of the buyer. So my client was the buyer, and
Yep.
the retained earnings on the balance sheet were negative $1 million or something like that. And so, but that just says that it's the business owner has been stripping the business of all the cash, and that's why they were being acquired. And they were,
Yep.
we actually walked away from that deal
Wow.
because of what I've done. But retained earnings for me is a big deal, but also so is the balance sheet. Like you said, I'm looking to
Yeah.
see what assets are there, what is their fair market value, what are the liabilities and how much, and what are the payments, and then is there a cash flow forecast?
Yep. Yep.
That's
Yep.
really, for me, it's the two biggest things: retained earnings and cash flow forecast. In terms of growth, um, I would take consistently steady, almost no growth company over hyper growing company any day of the week. And the reason is that for me,
Okay.
I don't care as much about growth. There is going to be growth whether you want it or not, but
Okay.
I care more about predictable revenue,
Uh-huh.
consistent revenue, consistent expenses, and maybe better processes and things like that, where you can squeeze out the profit without necessarily building the top line. Because what a lot of business owners do, and I'm sure you will agree with it,
Mhm.
they say, "Oh, we're going to be at 2 million this year." I'm like, that doesn't impress me. What impresses me is how much of the 2 million will be profit.
Mhm. Mhm. Yeah, it's not what you made, it's what you keep, right? A lot of businesses went under after driving huge revenue years, but they're still upside down. Um,
Exactly.
I think I always look to operation cost and wages. I once looked at a company, they had taken in seed investment, $4.5 million. It was about 2 years later, they were looking for a new investor to come in to, they had burned through the $4.5 million. So I said, okay, let me take a look. Let me take a look at your capital. Like, where did the money go?
Uh huh.
Uh, 65% of the $4.5 million went to operating cost. Of that 65%, 90% of it was wages. The rest was rent and certain online tools. And I simply could not believe it. You guys paid yourself into nothingness. And it really started top down. The CEOs were taking high salaries. And I tell every one of my founders, don't take a high salary, but take your owner's dividend. Every quarter,
Yeah.
if your company's
Yeah.
winning, take your pound of flesh. But if you're gonna bleed this thing to pay your wage and go to the country club, chances are I don't think you understand the requisite sacrifice of growing a business.
Yeah, exactly. Absolutely 100% agree with that. And unfortunately, we see this much more often. The problem is that with the traditional accounting model where an accountant deals with 300 to 900 clients, nobody has an extra 5 minutes a year to look at your business and to help you actually grow it. But we are the
Mm.
right people to help you grow it if we know how to coach you and how to help you be the better CEO. But the problem is this notion of the accountant being commodity has really
Hmm.
really created a disservice not only to accountants, lives and health and whatever, but also to the businesses, because in America 50% of businesses fail within 5 years. That's a known statistic.
Yep.
And the reason that they fail, number one, is there's no market for their product, so wrong product, wrong market.
Yep.
And number two is running out of cash flow, running out of cash.
Yep.
So
I
yeah.
th- I mean, what I liken that to. It was a couple of years ago when I was first starting out the Drive Group. I was having a conversation with this guy. He was in the insurance business, and he gave me one piece of advice. I remember to this day. He says, "Good business is not industry specific. Smart businesses run the same way. No, I don't care if you're selling boats, selling TVs, selling
Correct.
flooring. I don't care if you're selling lifestyle advertising. I don't care if you're Tinder, right? And selling relationships. Smart businesses run smartly. And I remember retaining that and thinking, you know what? A lot of times in the beginning, when you're a founder, when you're just starting out, an accountant is a dose of medicine that feels too aggressive because they're always that dose of reality. Um, they're always that, and then you always want to write it off and say you don't understand the industry, you don't understand what we're doing. But I always go back to that piece of advice. Good businesses are not industry specific, and all good businesses have somebody who knows the numbers. And that's what your accountant is there to do, to help you to understand the numbers, to let you know we're not doing that right now. We got to prepare for what's going to happen tomorrow. But I, maybe it feels as if I know that the series is called how to piss off an accountant. I think that the concern in our culture has been that the accountant and the founder have been taught that they're in competition as opposed to in partnership.
Yeah, it should be a partnership. And I don't necessarily expect you to tell me how to piss off an accountant in your interview, but but I do appreciate the inside look from somebody who's looking at how to turn around a business or invest or buy a business or whatever the setup may be, because I've certainly dealt with my share of all of those people, with for a client, for example. But
Mhm.
I absolutely appreciate your insight into that. And it's more, I think that, and I don't know if you will agree with this or not. I
Sure.
believe that there are two things in business you can never delegate, and number one is your cash flow. Meaning, like my
Mm.
CEOs that I work with, I always teach them how to manage their cash flow and how to, like, some of them look at their books every day, look at their cash every day. They plan, they
Mhm.
strategize, they're upfront with the vendors if they need a little delay. They don't just not pay, but they're like, listen, I'll pay you next week. I'm waiting for an influx of cash. Whatever that situation may be, that's what really builds a CEO for me. And number
Mhm.
two is knowing why, knowing your why, kind of knowing your unique selling proposition,
Mhm.
and having everybody align with it, your mission, your proposition, whatever that is. But
Mhm.
like you said, not being jack of all trades, master of none, but being somebody who's actually knows what they're really good at one or two or three things, and stay
Mhm.
good, great at them, and then
Mhm.
discontinue everything else.
I mean, that's what's always hard. Founders, if you think of great founders, they sometimes make bad CEOs because a founder is a visionary that probably galvanizes people around them by showing that they can almost do everything. And a CEO is a conductor. Their ability to delegate from the sideline, they're a coach, they're a motivator. There's something, it's a different skill set, right? A founder has to be a visionary in spite of the evidence. A CEO has to take the evidence and plan a vision. There's, it's two totally different skill sets. And I think that when we're looking at investing on our side, it's not, is the founder a CEO? Because maybe they're not, but do they have the team around them? Have they put inside the necessary pieces, the necessary advisors? How's their C-suite that will help them look more and more like a CEO as time goes on? I think of the greatest example of this is Facebook. And I never give the answer because I always want people to do their homework. But look at Facebook's time. Mark Zuckerberg comes in. They have an incredible amount of growth at Facebook. Then, about 3 years ago, right before they lost billions of dollars doing Meta, they lost their head of business. One person. I would encourage everybody to go take a look. Who was Facebook's head of business for the past 15 years? How big did the company get? How good did the company run? One person leaves, and you have the Meta disaster, and Mark Zuckerberg was there the whole time. Does that say that Mark Zuckerberg is not a great CEO? No. But there was a time when, as a founder, he knew he needed a right horse sort of calling the shots. That changes, and all of a sudden he's sitting in front of Congress trying to explain the metaverse that, quite frankly, wasn't ready. But, that it's all, that could all be into the ether. But I look at that example, even on massive, huge billion-dollar companies, that truth can play itself out. Great founders sometimes are not great CEOs. They need those tools around them. And I think on my side, we're always looking for that. Are you coachable? Are you willing to bring on the right people? And a lot of times that health is found in the balance sheet and also the history of their C-suite. Where'd you find these people? Who'd you pick them? Are you taking the best talent from competitors so you could learn, rehash your culture, grow your culture? Or are you going totally status quo? Because I think the idea is that since 1970, 80% of the Fortune 500 companies are different, or something like that. It's a high number, and that's terrifying, right? Because 500 of our greatest success stories couldn't stick the landing when push came to shove. A story I tell people all the time: people are talking about banning TikTok, which I understand. TikTok's a huge social media platform. I encourage everybody to explain to me how Vine could die in 2 to 3 years. Vine was a social media video sharing platform, and TikTok's the biggest thing going. And the distance between them was 7 years apart. I'm assuming it has something to do with the business, not the product. So these are just ramblings from a venture capitalist.
I love it. I absolutely agree with everything you said because it makes perfect sense to me, and that I know I've lived it. I've worked with small businesses for 18 years, and
Yeah.
I've seen different kinds of leaders, different kinds of CEOs. Some of my best CEOs, I'll give you an example. I've worked with two CEOs in the during COVID. I mean, I've worked with one of them for 10 years. I've worked with another one at that point in 2020 was maybe 1 or 2 years.
Mhm.
And both were in the fashion industry, right? So it's not an easy business, as you may know. Retail business is never, especially with fashion, people have to try stuff on, high return rate, high exchange rate, and that kind of stuff. And you pay processing fees when people return, so you generally lose money on the returns.
Mhm.
But one of them has been in business for almost 30 years. It's going to be 30 years next year.
Cool.
And the other one has been in business for maybe 5 years total. And the one, when COVID hit, one of them, the one that's been in business for 5 years, said, "We're going to cut my retainer, in half." The other one, who's been in business for 30 years, said, "Well, we have to make sure we have to do some forecasting to make sure that none of our employees loses their job, that we can afford everything and kind of pivot our business. And by the way, if you need money, just let me know." And that's the
Mm.
difference between the two CEOs. Same
Mm.
industry, same but different approach. One is a
Mhm.
coward because he doesn't even fire his own employees. The other one is a super strong CEO who's been around long enough to know what's important in business. And I'm sure you see that
Mhm.
all the time in your when you deal with founders and CEOs. I mean, yeah.
I would say the greatest gift for me, just saying that, and this is going to sound terrible. Okay, so the greatest gift is I spent, like I said, I spent a lot of years as the head of operations at another company. So I spent 4 years as somebody else's hatchet man. You know, uh, it's like we used to joke and say I was Ray Donovan. I'd get tapped on the shoulder. If we're downsizing, I'm telling the staff. If that's just the way they were as a CEO, they were more of a vision caster. Not to make any judgment on that, but I was there to be on the ground to have to command the soldiers, and uh, the skill that the sensitivity and the skill that gave me drives that example. I have every belief that before 2017, stepping into those operation shoes, we run into a difficult time and I'm the CEO. It's easy to want to hide. You think, you know what, I delegate, I'll delegate this one away too. You send out an email or a note. Those years those spent in operations, looking people in the eye, knowing the responsibility you have, not just to your staff, but to your partners. One thing that I've learned is that everybody knows when it's a tough time. Everybody knows when it's a tough time. Your staff knows, because especially in a client facing business, they see nobody's coming through the door. They see the empty tables. They see that the phones aren't ringing as strong as they used to. They see that everybody knows when it's a tough time, but everybody respects if you can look them in the eye. Everybody respects if you can look them in the eye, because at the end of the day, there's a social contract that is beyond money that exists when you are the founder of a company or when you're working with other people, which says faith in me, faith in you, under the principle of how we'll handle one another. So I am a big believer in that when you talk about that 5-year and that 30-year story, it is the gift and the in the way I view business. It is both the gift and the curse of the leader, of the founder. The hardest conversations got to be had with you in the room. And the truth is that you need to have a small enough ego that some of the best conversations probably happen without you in the room, because you got to empower your other people. You're in a weird way, you're there to be the hatchet man.
Yeah.
You're the janitor. And the janitor doesn't get the glory, but they are vital to the success and the optics of anything.
Yeah, I absolutely agree. And I think it has to do with also, running a business for a little bit longer, but also it not being about the money or only about the money. I
Yep.
think that's what was evident um, from this experience that I've had with these two clients, but it has to do with I'm in it because I want to create clothing that makes a certain demographic look great.
Mm-hmm.
Or I'm here because this type of clothing makes a ton of money.
Mm-hmm. Mm-hmm. Yeah, I mean, we used to have this. I used to play football. Coach always used to say, "You got to know your why. You have to know your why, because it's easy to play when you're fresh, when you're happy, when you're up by 30. But when you're in the fourth quarter, you're exhausted. It kind of hurts all over. You're down 10. You got to believe in something bigger than the score to go play this game.
Absolutely.
You got to know your why, and I think it's the same in business. Got to know your why.
I don't know if you've heard of the two books that I've been recently. I mean, I read a lot of business books and just books in general, self help and
Mm-hmm.
self development, because I always learn. I think that's what's been a part of my success. I always keep learning. But one
Mm-hmm.
of them was Five Levels of Leadership.
Okay.
Has been a phenomenal book. And for some reason, it's listed in Christian literature. It has nothing to do with religion, but I think because the author who wrote it is a reverend or was a reverend or whatever.
Okay.
But very, very cool. Talks about the 5 levels of leadership and how style 5 trains other leaders to become leaders, which is what you've mentioned about the small ego. Like if you're
Yep.
a leader 5, like level 5 leader, there is a lot of space at the top. So like a lot of leaders don't let others grow as leaders, and here
Mm-hmm.
um, it's really important, I think, to remember why you're in it. And then another book is Simon Sinek's Start with Why. I mean, the title speaks for itself,
Mm-hmm.
but I've just recently listened to the book, and I was very impressed in a sense that I really loved how the book was written
Mm-hmm.
and read, and it really makes a lot of sense. And not most of the time, but a lot of time, companies go out of business because they don't know their why, or maybe they've lost it. Maybe the founder knew and everybody else knew, and then they've lost it, and that's it.
Yep, I agree. One thing I always tell founders, only because I know we're coming against it, just in terms of why I like that type of leadership. An entrepreneur or a founder's goal should always be for the company to be bigger than them, and that's hard when the company starts growing. Founders like being rock stars. They get invited to all the parties, they do all the interviews, they drive all the fast cars. But at the end of the day, you're playing for the badge. The
Yeah,
business is the badge. The greatest service that you do for your business is providing it an opportunity to go on in spite of yourself. So that's why I always believe in creating new leaders. If something happens to me, there's a core team of 5 that should be chomping at the bit, ready to go, on vision, on task, and the company continues. If it stops with me, then I think I've done something wrong as a leader, and I look for that when investing in other businesses. Can this thing go, and how long does it go, and how far does it go without you? and that is a direct result of your choices.
Yeah, I absolutely agree. And another book that I've just recently read, um, that brought up something that you just touched on. Oh, can't remember it. Maybe it will come back to me. But growing other leaders and also making a business run without you, I think, is important, because, like you said, if you're, and it applies to accounting firms. A lot of people, a lot of people, think that when you're buying an accounting firm, like, they have this ego when they build an accounting firm,
Sure.
and so they build it around their name.
Yep.
I specifically chose a different name for my firm, because I didn't want. I wanted it to exist without me one day, and
Hmm.
I don't know when that day is going to come. Maybe it's 5, 10, 20 years, but I want it to exist without me, and for clients not to feel the difference, for them to not even
Mm.
care or know what happens. And so I think ego is a big problem, for many people, because growing their business is because of what you've said, because it
Hmm.
prevents them from growing a business, um, the way they want to be, the way they want it to exist without them. Because what happens if if something happens to you? What happens then?
Hmm.
That's the big question.
Yep. I think, look, it's a necessity. I don't want to sound insensitive. When you're first starting out and when you first get there, you first break through, I understand it needs you. It needs every single part of you. It's going to take every single part of you. The goal has to be to change that, though. You got to want to give some of, I don't want to say give some of it away, but the company has to outgrow your ability to keep it all together, right? If you got to figure, if it's this big, I can keep it in my hand. If it's this big, it's a bit harder. Once it gets the size of this room, it would be impossible for me to keep every component and every aspect in its shape. Which is why you got to empower other leaders and delegate and trust. Teach them qualities, teach them values, and then delegate and trust. Don't look for it to be done exactly the way that you would do it, but look for the result to be close to what you'd expect. And these are things that I think are important.
Yeah, absolutely, absolutely. Um, Sorry, just your sound just like changed slightly, but it was good. So sorry about that.
No, it's fine.
Hopefully the sound issues will not persist.
I,
Well,
I trust the sound issues will not persist. They will not. I declare it now that they will not exist in the final recording of this.
absolutely. Well, thanks so much for sharing your perspective, because a lot of times people, business owners, don't even consider the position of an investor. I work with somebody, meaning work with them because they do turnaround loans, and we created this fractional CFO training for accountants, together. And the
Hmm.
reason is that he works with turnaround businesses because, um, and he noticed that a lot of accountants don't do fractional CFO work correctly. They don't do like a bunch of the stuff that needs to be done, because the CPAs have huge egos, and they're like, "Oh, we know how to do fractional CFO service,"
Sure.
um, and then they don't do the balance sheet management. They don't do the forecast when it comes to liability payments and equipment service and all of those things. And so I think it's important to remember, what you mentioned, that ego is. I think that ego is the number one enemy that anyone can
Mm.
have, to be
Hmm.
successful in business and profession, whatever that is.
Hmm. Hmm. Yeah, an unchecked ego is fatal, right? If every business founder, every person with ambition, every entrepreneur is born with a fatal touch of ego. And the challenge as they mature and as they learn is to keep that in check. It's not that you don't have it, but it's that you got to treat it, you got to make it dormant, you got to control it. But we're all born with it. It's all in there waiting for us, and it's
Yeah.
about us to keep it at bay.
Yeah, absolutely. And I think what we just recorded with you, is a good reality check for someone who's listening, who's maybe thinking of starting a business, maybe already started a business. I think it's a good, like you said, what did you say, dose of reality? I wrote it down because
Yep.
I really liked it.
Yeah, 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 yeah.
It's not just the accountant who gives you the dose of reality; it's also an investor. And I wrote a book a number of years ago. It launched, and there's a chapter on whether or not you should have investors. And my initial inclination was, no, don't have investors. But then I interviewed a client of mine who for years has been doing, getting some angel investments here and there and developing his business model. And it's completely changed from 2011 to today, 2023. But in the
Mhm.
interview, he said to me, I think everybody should have an investor. And I thought, how does that make sense? And he said, well, when there's one person, there's a lot of people who are ready to give you advice because people love giving advice. But if there's one person who's ready to write a check to your business, that means your business model is solid. And that made sense to
Mhm.
me. So I'm wondering, how do you feel about that?
I think I believe in investment for scalability, not for creation. I know what I'm saying. It might not right, but this is just me. I gotta know that you took it from your pocket, even if it was your last $5, and put it on the line and bet for it. I don't care if you're only servicing one client, two clients, three clients, four clients, but I can't be your first call. It can't go from paper to my pockets. It's got to be something first, even if it's just online. And then, okay, let's cut a check and let's get this thing really going. So I like the idea of investors for scalability. I always do, because I think you can go fast alone but far together. So I do believe it does have to eventually become this monolithic thing that is the hopes and ambitions of a group of people. But I like the idea of a founder in the beginning with a single vision going out there and at least proving a concept. So what does that look like? If you want a restaurant, did you bring your meals to a town fair and get some groundwork going there? And then now let's cut a check for a restaurant. If you did the town fair, did you then do a food truck? And then okay, now let's go giddy up and go get a restaurant. Did you forget town fair? Did you host a dinner party for your family and friends? Ghost kitchen style. You're doing that once a month. Okay, let's cut a check and let's go get a restaurant. Um, Same thing with clothes, anything consumer facing. But at your level with what you could do, did you put it on the line? If you did, then I'll put it on the line with you. But we both have to see this thing as, as something that was worthy of our dollars.
Absolutely, 100% right. And as we wrap up the episode, I love to ask this question of my guests. If you could go back in time and talk to your younger self, what would be the one thing that you would tell yourself?
Oh, wow. Just one.
Yeah.
Wow. Oh, wow. One thing I would tell myself, it would have been when I was in grade 11. So I would have been about, 15 turning 16. Yeah, 15 turning 16. So I would have been 15 years old, 16 years old. It's around the time you're thinking about college applications. At least where I am, you kind of think about it in the 11th grade to lock it in because you submit halfway through the 12th grade, you're already in, right? So you think about it early. What you do in school doesn't have to be what makes you money. What you do in school does not have to be what makes you money. Uh, had I accepted that sooner, I might have found my career faster. But I was perhaps beholden to a more traditional thought that said good grades, good job, good house, good wife, good life, good kids. So I think I initially picked a major that I thought would parlay to employment. And now I'm an entrepreneur. So obviously my plans at 17 didn't quite stick the landing. So I'd say that what you do in school doesn't have to be what makes you money. It does have to be something though that piques your interest. It does have to be that you're willing to start and finish. It does have to be something where you're willing to network, do the extra work, stay present. Because I think that those things will get you more out of the school experience should you choose to go than just picking something you think will get you a job. That would be what I would tell myself at 15, 16.
I love it. It very much aligns with everything I believe in. Yeah, and I think that some people need to hear that. So many of us hold ourselves to this career choice. One of the books that I read, and I think it was maybe even Simon Sinek's Start With Why, where he talked about some of the people telling their parents at like 10, oh, I want to be a doctor, and then sticking with it, even when they realized they hated because they,
Mm-hmm.
told their parents. So I
Mm-hmm. Mm-hmm.
absolutely agree with everything you've said. So thanks so much for sharing that.
Pleasure.
Well, Trivelle, it's been a pleasure to have you on the call, to record this episode with you. I had a lot of fun. Thanks so much for your personality and for showing up and sharing some golden nuggets with us.
Absolutely.
And yeah, it's been a pleasure to have you as a guest.
Absolutely. Thank you for having me. For those who want to follow up, if you liked what I said, you can find myself and my team at on Instagram at the Drive Group Inc. at the Drive Group Inc. Or you can check out our website, thedrivegroup.ca, where you'll see other content, some of the stuff we do on YouTube. We do long form, short form, informational content on both business and finance. So you can check us out there.
Awesome. Thanks so much. And everybody who's listening or watching, if you're watching on YouTube, please tune in next week for another great episode of Talk to Tatiana. See ya.